she messages me on Facebook, says, I know you do all this work for us, but I didn't know you do comedy. And in my mind, it's like, well, I didn't know either. It just sort
Just
of
kind of happened.
happened.
Look into his eyes. They're the eyes of a man obsessed by
Success.
eyes that mock our sacred institutions. Bedroom eyes, they call them in a bygone day.
Sex desire is the most powerful of human desires. When driven by this desire, men develop keenness of imagination, courage, willpower, persistence, and creative ability unknown to them at other times. So strong and impelling is the desire for sexual contact that men freely run the risk of life and reputation to indulge in. When harnessed and redirected along other lines, this motivating force maintains all of its attributes of keenness of imagination, courage, etc., which may be used as powerful creative forces in literature, art, or in any other profession or calling, including, of course, the accumulation of riches. Napoleon Hill.
Hey there, peeps. This is Michelle Nedluck, and I am super glad that you're here with us today because I have my most amazing guest, Keith. Keith, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hello.
He waves at the camera. It's like, dude, it's a podcast. You gotta say stuff.
Hello.
Awesome. So give us a 5,000-foot view of who you are and what you love to do.
My name's Keith Nahanee. I'm a First Nations comedian in North Vancouver, BC, and I run Bubbas comedy show.
Awesome. And I am so glad that I am here with you today because I like to, my ego kicks in and I go, I'm a friend of Keith's.
Yeah.
I met Keith 10 years ago. I haven't talked to you since. But you're also one of those kind of awesome personalities where you feel like you get to know you immediately, like I've known you all my life. And if I haven't seen you in 10 years, it's still, hey, let's connect. You're awesome. And you're just right there, full present and awesome. So thank you so much for doing this, being here today with us, because I'm so stoked about what you're up to.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to talk to you again. We had a lot of fun back in the day in training, and really honored to be on here and talk about comedy.
Awesome. So let's go into the comedy directly. How did you get into comedy per se?
My brother introduced me to Robin Williams back in the 80s, and I just loved him. I was laughing. I was only 13, 14 years old, and I was laughing. I've watched comedy since then, getting into the late 90s, early 2000s. My friends are saying, you should go do open mic. You should go do open mic. You're so funny. I'm like, whatever. I'm just being a goofball with you guys. About 2012, actually, a mutual friend of ours, Sean, when I was in training in Edmonton, he said, dude, you should get into comedy. You're super funny. And he's a comedian. And so he planted the seed, and I thought about it. A couple of years went by. On the reserve here in North Vancouver, we had, from January to September, we had about 40 deaths in our nation. And so I started talking to my wife, Bernie, who's also my business partner with producing shows here. And we decided to put a show on to help bring laughter into the community. And we had no idea what to do. So we just contacted our gym on the reserve and said, hey, we want to put a comedy show on. And then someone said, oh, well, you need to serve it right. And she got her serve it right. And so she's on the producing side. She does probably 90% of the work. And then
Nice.
I do the other 10%, which is just getting up on stage. But we produced the show first. I wasn't even on stage. It went well. And then the second show, about 6 months later, my MC couldn't make it. So my wife said, well, you've been talking about wanting to try it, so you're going to do it. So I MC'd the second show. And from there, it really snowballed.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's so many places I could take this because I was gobsmacked when you said that there were so many deaths on, like, that's a lot in a short period of time. That is painful. Like
Yes.
not only for whatever they were going through to make that happen, but then for everybody else that's dealing with the aftermath. That
Yes.
had to have been horrific.
Yeah. It was pretty bad. Lot of elders passing away, accidents, and there was, I believe that year there was about 2 or 3 suicides.
Aw.
And suicides aren't that common here on our reserve. We're just on outside of Vancouver City.
Mm-hmm.
But that year there's
So
about 3 in
that's
a
brutal,
short span of time.
right?
So yeah,
Wow. So you must have been like to put on a comedy show after that. I can appreciate the need for it. And I can also appreciate the laughter is one of the best medicines. I can also appreciate that you're walking on pretty thin eggshells trying to say, hey, I'm not trying to make light of this, but like, how did you navigate that?
I threw my friend Haitam as MC, and he's never MC'd anything before.
You blindsided one of your friends. That's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And then he ended up MCing our wedding when my wife and I got married. But he's outgoing. He's they call him a Blindian. He's black and native. So he's outgoing. I gave him the names. I said, talk about whatever you want to talk about. And my wife was taking care of the open bar, and I was making sure the comics were ready. The comics were there, making sure there's no hecklers, watching the front door. And I just went around and just told everyone, there's gonna be some comedy coming up. You should come check it out. We had a police officer on our first show, sex educator. She's not a comedian, but she is funny, and she took her work. She had a 4-foot vagina and penis, and she talked about them and just made it super fun.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
we just broke even. We had about 85 people, but to rent the
Wow.
venue, my wife works for insurance,
Mhm.
and she said, we're not doing this show without insurance. So we had to
Yeah.
pay for insurance. So we just literally broke even.
Wow. That is good for you. Congratulations. I know how much work and effort it is to put on an event of any size, let alone to have that many speakers coming in. Like you're herding cats, trying
Yeah.
to get them to all show up at the same time, know where they're going, all that kind of fun stuff. That is awesome. So when you started emceeing the event, what was that like for you? Was it kind of slightly terrifying, extremely exhilarating, somewhere in between? Both?
It was in between, because before I did stand-up comedy, I don't know if you know this from back in the day, I was a church license holder for our Indian church here on the reserve, and I married, baptized, and did funerals. So
Wow.
I had experience of speaking in front of people. So that was okay. And then just trying to come up with my own jokes.
Right? Because it's totally different skill set being the class clown and getting everybody's attention to all of a sudden being in the front of the room and getting everybody's attention. I've seen a lot of class clowns look like deer in the headlight when I pull them up to the front of the stage, like, oh, I wasn't expecting this.
People that paid for you to make them laugh, that's even more pressure.
Right? It's like,
Yeah.
come on, funny man, make me laugh.
Yeah. And right from there, I've had a lot of support, friends volunteering to take care of the door, friends volunteering, because the gymnasium can hold, I think, 350 people.
Nice.
So we had to have security, and we do have some volunteers on the reserve. We call them peacekeepers,
Nice.
and they patrol the reserves and work with the RCMP here. So we had, I think, 1 or 2 of the peacekeepers there just to help out, and they volunteered. So I couldn't have done it without them.
Aw, that's awesome. That's so sweet. Cool. So since then, things have bubbled and exploded, and you are all over the place. I have seen your Facebook just explode, and it's like, oh, I'm doing this show, I'm doing that show, and then we're here. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's really great. I do have a full-time job and I do have my holidays. So if I need to travel, my manager knows I do comedy and I give him the dates that I need, whether it's a half a day or a full day. He's pretty flexible on that. And then I just go all over. I even went to Lillooet, which is about a 2.5 hour drive from here,
Yeah.
because from that reserve, this lady wanted to try comedy. She's never done comedy. And the bonehead I am, I said, well, rent a venue and I'll come up and we'll do a show and we'll pop your comedy cherry and go from there. And I've been up there 3 times now to do
Nice.
shows with her. And it's fun every time we go up, whether it's fun at the comedy show or the adventure of going or coming from there is just hilarious with some of the other comics. Yeah, and after the first show went well, 6 months later, we did the second show. We called the first one Dirty Work. Second one was Dirty Work 2 Mixed Nuts, because there was a variety of races and that, not just natives. And that was in May of 2015. And I didn't do any comedy. And then in November, I lost a nephew in Victoria. And so I had to go to the funeral, catch the ferry over to Vancouver Island. And I was looking on Facebook, and some of the guys that were on Dirty Work 2 were doing a comedy tour on the Vancouver Island. And they were in Duncan, which is probably about an hour's drive from Victoria. So I messaged him and said, hey, you're doing comedy in Duncan? He said, yeah. I said, oh, well, I'll come up and check out your show. So we went up there and checked out his show. He was doing 2 shows, 8 and 10 o'clock. I watched the first show and I was talking to him after the first show, and he says, oh, are you going to stay for the second show? I said, well, there's nothing else to do. Everything closes at 6 o'clock here in this little town. He goes, okay, you got the first 10 minutes. I was like, what? And I only been on stage once. He goes, do you want to? And I looked over and my wife's going, yes, yes, yes. And I'm like, can I use my phone? Because my jokes are on my phone. And he's like, yeah, whatever, man. So I did the set. We left the show, went and got a room, went to sleep. First thing in the morning, he calls me, says, we're going to Victoria to do another show. You want to do another 10 minutes? I was like, yeah, sure, right on. So we go down there, do that show. And another comic on that show says, hey, I'm doing a show on Tuesday in Vancouver. You want to be on? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So just being in Victoria for a sad celebration, I got 3 shows.
That's
And
awesome.
And I do other work for other reserves. I do workshops. And the one that was hiring me up in the Pemberton Valley, just past Whistler, she messages me on Facebook, says, I know you do all this work for us, but I didn't know you do comedy. And in my mind, it's like, well, I didn't know either. It just sort
Just
of
gonna happen.
happened. And she says, well, in 2 weeks, we're having our Christmas staff party. Can you do an hour-and-a-half show? I'm like, oh, geez. I said, yeah, sure. She's like, how much? And I threw her a price and she said, okay. I was like, so I called up those guys that were doing the tour. I said, hey, I'll pay you guys this much and I'll pay for your room if you come up past Whistler and do 20 minutes each for me.
What?
They
Just
said,
because you
yeah,
can come up with 27 times more content.
right. And the first 2 shows I did, I called them Dirty Work. But as it was going out of my community, my wife said, we need to make the show more about you, who you are. And my nickname is Bubbas. And I drank out of a bottle until I was 3.5. And I called it my Bubbas. Most kids call him Bubba, but I was calling it Bubbas. And my dad's brother, Scott, started calling me Bubbas. So that's how the Bubba's Comedy Show got its name. So my wife said, well, let's call it Bubba's Comedy Show. And I've also, I took a little bit from Carrot Top and from Giggle Dam Theater here in Port Coquitlam. And they're actually interactive games with audiences. So I took some games and I put that in my Bubbas comedy show.
Fun.
Because most shows here are the name comedy, and that's stand-up. But I put comedy show because it's just not stand-up comedy. It's actually an interactive game in there that brings the audience members, and I give them my most popular prize. I go to a store here and I buy after sex towel. And so the winner will get an after sex towel, and I always tell them you don't have to use your shirt anymore. And they have this towel that says after sex towel. So I'll give them that for winning, and the others just walk off the stage with nothing.
Tail between the legs,
Yeah.
hoping nobody remembers what happened.
Yeah. So and they
That's
are
awesome.
one game involves oven mitts, a wooden dowel, and a condom. And I actually learned that from BC Disease Control Center because they use a banana and they get these youth to put the condom on with oven mitts.
Oh, hilarious.
So I found a styrofoam and I drilled 3 holes in there, and then I put the dowels in there, and I have 3 contestants that come up. The other one is using a casino chip and a mason jar. And we put the mason jar about 5 feet in front of them. They got to put the casino chip between their butt cheeks, and they got to walk it over and try to drop it in. So those, I'll use one or both of those games in my shows, Bubba's comedy show. And it was a hit. So
Right? That's awesome. So
yeah.
how brave were you the first time going, like, this could either be absolutely hilarious or it could be just a disaster on wheels? How worried were you that it was going to somehow bust?
How worried was I? Well, when I do culture stuff, I have a regalia, and I'm told by my dad that I have to make sure I have everything. Check it before I leave the house, get there, put it together, make sure everything's going to stay. Well, I didn't do that with my equipment. I have my own speakers, I have my own mixing board and a mic, and I left the cord of the mixer board on my couch, and I'm about 3 hours away from my house, and I'm freaking out. What am I gonna do? One of the cooks at this venue walking by, and he's like, "Hey, you okay?" Because you could see like I'm just and I said, I left a cord that I need. And he looks at it and he goes, I think we have one of those. So we went downstairs, and the same cord from a photocopy machine.
Wow.
So I used that, and I was like, dude,
Thank
you
God.
saved my life. And everything went. So now I make sure everything is in the bag.
Right?
Because I think when I was putting it all together, I think I threw my jacket over the cord. So when I was getting everything into the van,
Just
it
grab
was
your coat and forget
yeah.
everything and it's under it. Oh, I
Yeah.
can't tell you how many times we've done that. Yes, because we used to do local workshops and training too. So we had all of our equipment because it just made sense to buy all of our equipment, or you could rent it at half the price, or you could just buy it and use it 3 times and it was better. So yeah, we had all of our equipment. We had a van that showed. I was like, oh my
Wow.
God, that's a lot of shite. I can't
Yeah.
imagine. But I also know from public speaking that well, and doing workshops, that as soon as you leave the content to the audience, it's like, hey, anybody have any questions, comments, and concerns? You are leaving that up to chance as to what comes back. Like anything can come back, and it's got to be the same on a comedy show. You're not just delivering lines that you know work that always get a laugh. Like you're opening yourself up to some serious vulnerability because that's like having hecklers all on stage. It's like,
Yeah.
let's see how funny you guys are now.
Yeah. Yeah. It gets interesting. The first, I mean, it's been actually May 2nd, just this May 2nd was the 7 years ago, first time I was actually on stage.
Wow, congratulations.
Thanks. So the first, we still did shows on Zoom during the pandemic, which really sucked. Um,
For you or them.
yeah, well, they would close their cameras. They would
Mm,
turn their cameras off, so it's like
brutal.
talking to the wife, I mean the wall, and
That's zero feedback. That'd be awful.
it is. It's one or two of them will leave their cameras on, and but
Oh,
it's I'm I just kept my script.
right.
I had to use my cheat sheet on the jokes, and it wasn't until just before the pandemic where I could start interacting with the audience, where I wouldn't get lost anymore, and it's starting to pay off because this May 8th, I'm filming my first TV special.
Yay!
Yeah,
That's awesome! Congratulations.
thanks. And I don't want to use my cheat sheet, so
Right.
every day I'm going over my jokes, even just the one word,
Mhm.
restrictions,
Yep.
lockdown, um, gonna be 50, nutritionist. So I just go see those words in my mind and I know what the joke is.
Yep.
I have to do 25 to 30 minutes. And I've been just going crazy over it. And I'm getting a lot of support from the comedy shows here in Vancouver.
Nice.
A lot of them are saying, hey, congratulations. I heard you're doing here. If you're not headliner, you get anywhere from 5 to 8 minutes, 10 if you're lucky. But a lot of these comedy shows been saying, hey, I'll give you 10 minutes.
Nice.
I'll give you 15 minutes. I went to Abbotsford, which is about an hour from here. And he said, I just did it last week. And he said, do your whole show to practice it. I'll give you a half an hour. And I was like, dude, that is so amazing.
Awesome.
And yeah, just getting a lot of support.
Right
A lot
on.
of support, yeah. And some of the headliners, even here in Vancouver, that travel Canada and down the States, I was like, I've been following Damon Schwitter for probably about 10 years. And I did my first show with him last fall. And when the first show finished, we are doing two shows together. And the first show finished, he comes up and he says, hey, Damon, and I just seen your set, and wow, that's pretty amazing, pretty ballsy because of my content.
Right.
And I said, I'm Keith Nahanee. I said, I've been following you. I go to Yuck Yucks all the time. And he says, you sit in the corner right by the stage. And I said, yeah. He goes, I kind of thought I recognized you. So he knew me as an audience member, but he didn't know I did comedy. And then
Should have just told him you were famous and he knew you from TV.
he
Somewhere in the corner of your eye down here, you recognize.
right. And then about a month later, I did another show, and Dan Quinn, he's a famous Canadian
Yeah.
comedian, and I was on the same show with him, and we're both looking at the lineup at the same time. And I said, oh, there's me. I said, I'm Keith Nahanee. He goes, oh, I'm Dan. I said, yeah, I've watched your special a couple of times. He goes, do you say Keith Nahanee? And I said, yeah. He goes, Damon just told me about you. I said, no way. I was like really excited inside. And oh man, it was just,
Right?
it's been taken off. Yeah.
Nice. Well, yeah, because when comedians recognize the comedy of it, it's like that's a level up.
Yeah. And even some of the jokes that I have, another comic will come up and say, try this instead, or add this to it. And then I'll try it. And if it works, I'll keep it. If not, I'll try it a couple more times a different way.
Mhm.
But it's pretty good when you have a lot of people that are supportive with each other. There
Mhm.
are some that are competitors. I'm not here to compete against anyone. I'm just here doing what I love doing.
Mhm.
But there are a lot of ones that do a lot of support.
Nice.
Yeah.
Love that. Just take the naysayers and go, hey, you want to do a laugh off?
Yeah.
Kick your ass.
Yeah.
Class clown fight in the back at lunch hour. That's hilarious. I just can't imagine people being competitive in the field of comedy. It's like, do you know what you do for a living?
Yeah. Yeah.
Really? Uh,
And it's I had to get into the dark side of comedy. The dark side of I was getting gigs, but my stuff wasn't rated R, but it was between rated R and PG. I
mhm.
don't know what if there's a rate there, but when the Kamloops residential school found the 214 unmarked graves,
Mhm.
and it was just all over the news, I actually woke up thinking of a joke about the church. And I grew up Catholic, and then I was the license holder for my church for 8 years. And one of the comedy shows in Vancouver that's pretty big used to be called Blossom Comedy. Now she's called Comedy After Dark. And she said, well, I have this open on a Friday. Would you like to come and do a set? And I thought Friday and Saturdays are the big guys. They're the big
Right.
big comics. I'm like, oh crap, this is a test, isn't it? I know this is a test. So the ones I've been thinking about regarding the church and the reserves, those were the debuts. And it just killed. It
Nice.
was awesome. And I
Nice.
came off the stage and people were high-fiving me, and she was at the end and she had her arms out. She hugged me and she said, when you get home for next month, I want you to give me all the days you're available and I'll book you on some shows. I said, every day I'm available because I don't have any shows right now. And so it was the darker humor
Mhm.
that brought me up to the other level. And
Nice. Well, and I think it takes a certain skill set. Well, I know it takes a certain skill set to be able to get into that dark humor and to actually find the humor in it and not just make fun of it. Like there's a huge difference to me to making fun of a situation that everybody makes fun of. It's like, yeah, that's not really comedy. But when you can find the humor in dark and heavy matters, to me, that's, I don't know if it's a personality that, and I think you and I both have it, that at one point in our childhood, something snapped in our brain. We just weren't right anymore. And to me, it's this fantastic gift of being able to take something that is heavy and it is sad and it is like horrific,
mm,
but there's this element of something going on that you just got to go, if there's a god, he's got a sense of humor because that's funny.
yes, yes. And I've been using these church jokes for about a year and a half now.
Mm-hmm.
And I've only had one person get really mad. And it was a lady that was a churchgoer. And I was like, well, you're at a comedy show.
Right.
And
Well, and I never met a good Irishman that didn't know how to laugh at the church or being Irish or otherwise. Like this has been going on for centuries, people. This is not new.
yeah, exactly. And all I said to her is like, oh, you got offended? And she said, yeah. And I said, are you a churchgoer? And she said, yeah. I said, well, suck it up because we had to, and everyone just cheered on that. And she got even more mad. And I'm like, sorry, that was my no filter. I get in trouble with my wife sometimes. Some things just come out, and I'm like, I didn't think of that. It just came out. I always say Nahanees don't have any filters in their head. Um, but I run Bubba's comedy show, I also run Granny's Corner comedy out in our backyard. This will be our 5th summer, and each year it gets bigger and bigger. And we did get to run it 2020 because it was outdoors, well ventilated.
Nice.
And on the reserve, we do have a safety officer. So I was told, well, you better check with her to see if it's okay to run your comedy shows. And she said, long as they're 6 feet apart, you're outdoors, well ventilated, it should be fine. She said, tell me how big your yard is. So I measured it, told her, she said 30 people. I said, okay. And then I also run Can't We All Just Get Along?
Nice.
And no comedy show has ever produced this show because it is a racist show. So I'll have a native comic, I'll MC it, I'll have a native comic, a black comic, a white, a Chinese, whoever I can find. And I try not to have, 2 Chinese or whatever. Try not to. And you were mentioning, you can say anything, but it doesn't mean it's funny. Well, when I talk with these comics, I say they can't be degrading. They have to be actually funny. No, just slamming them.
For the sake of slamming them, that's totally
Yeah.
different. That's just not funny.
That's easy to do, but it's a little harder to actually make it funny.
Right.
And we have a river here called the Fraser River. And on one side is Richmond, and on the other side is Surrey. So Surrey is well known for East Indians, and Richmond is known for the Asian Chinese. And one of my Chinese friends told me the joke, and he said, what do you call the border between China and India? And I said, I don't know. He said, Fraser River, because our China is Richmond. And so, stuff like that. We have water restrictions here in Vancouver in the summer because it gets so dry now. And I say we wouldn't have a water restriction if the Chinese restaurants would turn their taps off in the kitchen because they continuously run their taps to wash their dishes. So, the jokes like that, natives, on every reserve, there's that one couple where they go out, split up, get back together, split up, get back together, split up, get back together. So really on the reserve, you don't break up, you just lose your turn. So on this show, the racist show, everyone says you can get away with it because it's on reserve and you're native. One of my white friends said I wouldn't be able to get away with that show. I would be canceled. But
that's why it's a private show.
There's a catch to it. We're all on stage together. I talk about racism. Everyone's racist to one level or another. Everyone is. Even if it's just a joke, there's a little bit of racist there. But we're all on the stage, and you get up and you make fun of all the races except your own. And once we're done, they go off stage. I also do music trivia on my Bubbas comedy shows. And my brother is a music fanatic. Everything from the 50s to the 90s, he knows about music, rock music. So Music Master Mark, he's been on 23 of my shows, or he's been on 8 of my shows, went up against 23 people. He only lost once.
Wow.
So we'll do that. And then once he's done, we bring the comics back up. They do another 5 to 7 minute set, but they only can make fun of their own. So that's what I call the balance.
The great equalizer.
Yeah. So you have to make fun of your own. And that's where I make fun of natives. And yeah, we're on our 3rd show, and people that did come to the show, we just had it February 19th. I think it was February 19th we had it. People that came to the show and the comics when is Can't We All Just Get Along 4 coming out? I was like, I don't know. I do this maybe once a year. And
I feel like it. Let's throw a major event.
yeah,
Off the top of my head, I gather some friends in the backyard.
yeah, and it's a blast. It's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. So I know people are going to want more from you. So I assume you have like a website with events and stuff that's going on, or where do people find out about what you got going on and where they can see you?
Yeah, I do have a website. It's bubbascomedyshow.com.
Mhm.
It has pictures of comics I've performed
People
with,
we don't know.
merchandise, yeah, merchandise, and I sell T-shirts, Bubba's Comedy, caps that says Res University. I usually do a Aboriginal Day show called Res University, and it's just all Native comics.
Mm.
There's a You click on the tab shows, and it has all the shows I'll be at, the links of the venue, the links of the show itself. I'm on Facebook, Bubba's Comedy. On the Facebook, you have to answer certain questions to be in the group. Um, and then I just joined Instagram, so that's another thing that one of the fellow comics is like, you gotta have Instagram. All the kids are on Instagram. It's like, okay, it's another thing I need to learn. I'm gonna be 50 years old. I can't learn new
You need
things.
some nephews or nieces or something. Just give that stuff to them. They're awesome at it.
Right? Yeah. So yeah, website bubbascomedyshow.com, Facebook Bubba's Comedy, Instagram Bubba's Comedy.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Love it. We will find you. I gotta ask, so do you think it's easier to do your kind of humor on the reserves, or do you think it's easier to do that in kind of what I'm gonna call a public venue?
Public venue, just by a slight.
Yeah? Why?
Well, in the backyard here, sometimes the jokes just don't go because they know it all. They know it already.
They've heard it already last
They've
Thursday.
heard it. They might have been part of it. That's one thing. My family and friends, if you're gonna use one of our stories or something, don't use my name. And
Hey, Doug,
seriously,
they don't know you.
I have about 15 best friends, and maybe 3 of them's come to my show. A lot of them won't come to my show because they think I'm gonna roast them.
They know us.
Yeah, and I roasted them on their wedding at their wedding reception.
So
So
they've heard all the jokes there too.
yeah, but it is especially with the residential jokes. I do get a lot of laughs, mostly whoas,
You're not allowed to say that. Like, what?
Yeah.
Really?
And there's shows where it's in the name, dark and dirty.
Mm.
So that's where I don't have to worry. I do look at the audience. Okay, this is a young audience. I'm not going to do residential. I went and did them at a show, and they're all young. I said, "Do you guys know what residential school is?" And they all said no.
No. Yeah,
And
it's
I was
hard
like,
to make a joke when you don't know what they're laughing at. Like,
yeah. So now I look at the audience. Okay, they're all young. I'm not doing the They know. I also do APTN jokes, Aboriginal People's Television Network.
right?
So they know the mainstream shows. I want those on APTN done res style, and then tell them how the show would be, and they'll laugh. So I can tell those jokes to a younger audience, 19 and over, 19 to 25. They'll understand that, but they won't understand residential school jokes and that. So I'm learning how to read the audience now too.
Well, yeah, and I assume as you grow and enter more international platforms, which I know you will, that's inevitable because you are hilarious. And I think it's just a matter of really finding out how, or the things that we all relate to, right? We've all had deaths in the family. We've all had people that go through shit. And the more you can figure out what that universal shit is that we're all going through, and the more you can make people laugh through it, I think that makes it for a more international show.
And it is a small world. It is a small world. I went to Yuck Yucks here in Vancouver to a show, and the lady was talking about her ex-boyfriend that
Doug? Kidding.
it does her talking about her ex-boyfriend that does a well-known hockey player announcer imitation that you and I know. And I said his name and she heard me. And she goes, "How do you know him?" And I said, "I went to hypnosis training with him." And she was mad that I knew him.
Sorry.
And I was like, it's a small world.
You got to
No.
know somebody's going to know Doug. I'm like, it's
Yeah.
inevitable.
Yeah. So
That's
it is
fun.
a small world. Where it's a lot of similar things. I talked to a Chinese guy about, English coming over here and how he spoke about them going over to China and conquering China and similar stories and that. So yeah, it's you just have to know what will work and what won't.
Yep. And sometimes you win, sometimes you lose.
Yeah.
Well, that fell. So
Yeah.
Next.
Yeah.
Moving on. That was awesome. You have been absolutely fabulous. I love it. I could, of course, talk to you forever about this because, one, I think it's hugely important that people learn to laugh, especially when it doesn't seem like there's anything to laugh about. It's paramount, and I think it's a survival skill that the faster you can learn, the better, and the more you hang around comedians, people with a twisted sense of humor, the easier it is to adopt. So I am highly proactive on the making comedy mainstream
Yeah.
because I think it's just fabulous. And as a business unto itself, that's kind of funny too. So
And I hope comedy becomes like the pandemic. I hope the restrictions are lifted because there's
Right.
some shows where there are restrictions and audience put restrictions. So hopefully that'll be lifted too, just as much as the pandemic restrictions.
right? That was awesome. Excellent. Any last words for our peeps, Keith?
Um,
Go see Keith.
Go see Keith. Yeah. Check out Bubba's comedy show. Laugh as much as you can. Laugh as much as you can. Look at the comedians that lived a long time because they laughed. Yeah.
Nice.
And that's the way I want to die laughing.
Awesome. Peeps, this is Michelle Nedelec, your mistress in business. Thank you for being here with us today, and be sure to subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast app so that we can help you get it up and keep it up. You need me because I love having you here. We'll see you next show.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Little Blue Pill for Business podcast with your mistress in business, Michelle Nedelec. Why are you still here? Go to littlebluepillforbusiness.com and get your goodies. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to share it with somebody else that you know would enjoy getting it up in business after you subscribe to the podcast, of course, so you won't miss any future episodes. Now, check the notes for links. Oh, and only tell your wife if she's into this, entrepreneurship. And I'll see you both on the other side.
As Hyman Mandel once said, never